We're doing
Yeah,
all
I'll react
this,
to that, sure.
heavy training and nothing's happening, so very frustrated. So I think when we were finally briefed on the model, I mean, we thought, well, hell, this is going to be something. We had been...
There's just something I love about, like, your classic British gentlemen, you know? They just seem so stoic and positive, yet reserved. And, you know, oh, well, you got 13 batteries here. You got 10 spotlights right here. You got a few, 50 anti-aircraft weapons over here. You're going to go in with this boat right here and hopefully not get destroyed, and then just go and ram this and blow it up and then get back over here. Jolly good. Okay, let's go. I love it.
Trained both in the dark, blindfolded in the day, in every form of demolition to do with dock demolitions, trains and anything. So when we heard that we were going to blow up the dock installations at Saint-Nazaire, I suppose really it was a feeling of elation.
At this stage, people were saying, well, what do you think? To me, you see. And I said, it's going to be a piece of cake. We're going to go in there and knock them for six, because that reflected the optimistic attitude. We were going to go in there, blow up this bloody dock, and we'll be out.
Easy as that.
We had volunteered, after all, for...
Thought I had to sneeze.
Danger. And there did seem an off chance that it was impossible, and therefore it would succeed.
As the commandos prepared on land, the Navy set about the Campbelltown. The old tub would have to sneak past 80 gun emplacements on its way up the Saint-Nazaire estuary, so it had to be disguised, and they only had 12 days to do the work. In the end, they removed 2 funnels and sloped the other 2 backwards, so at a glance it looked a bit like a German destroyer. And then there was the problem of turning it into a time bomb. This job was given to a brilliant young naval officer called Lieutenant Nigel Tibbets. He was a shy chap with a stammer who, when his girlfriend announced that she'd become fond of him, replied, "Well, then I suppose we shall have to get married." However, while he was not desperately confident with women, he was a whiz with explosives, one of the best students the Dartmouth Naval College had ever seen. But even he faced difficulties with how you turn a whole ship into a bomb. The first problem he had was deciding where in the ship to place the explosives. Because you see, if you can imagine, this is the gate to the dock and this is the ship. What's going to happen after it hits? I mean, is it just going to end up here, in which case you want the bomb in the front? Or is it going to rear up, in which case you want the bomb sort of in the middle, toward the bottom? I suppose theoretically it would be possible, if the ship were going fast enough, for it to actually ride right over the top of the gate and end up in the dock itself. I mean, who knew? Day and night, Tibbets struggled with this until he decided on a spot 40 feet back from the prow, low down, next to the keel. Then he had to work out how to set the explosives off. Back then, there was no accurate timing device, so he had to use fuses like this. The idea is that you squeeze the top part here, which breaks a glass capsule on the inside, releasing acid that then slowly burns through a strip of wire. Now, when that snaps, it releases a spring which boings out, setting off the detonator. Now, this was very advanced in 1942, but there were a couple of problems. First of all, it was very susceptible to jolts and shock. You wouldn't, for instance, want to ram some lock gates at 25 miles an hour with one of these on board, because it might go off instantly, killing everyone. It was also very vague. The strength of the acid varied from fuse to fuse, the strength of the wire varied, the tension of the spring varied. Tibbets couldn't say to within an hour when the bomb might actually go off.
Wow. Well, you think of the time that it would stay there, that if everything were to go wrong past, you say you ram the dock and it's good, and then everything else goes wrong, and everyone ends up dying, and the ship or whatever, but the fuse is lit. I mean, there's no way that the Germans are going to be able to pull that boat out very quickly, and who knows if, I'm assuming I think they would catch on what the idea was, and that the boat was a bomb itself, because why would the British do that with such a small party without that being a bomb? And so they would be hesitant to want to go near it, but maybe during wartime you don't have a choice. And then how long do you have, can you take the boat out there before it explodes? So an hour might seem like a long time to be able to stop it, but also, when you think about it, it's really not that long of a time. You know what I mean? Did I make sense there?
Choosing what explosive to use, however, was fairly straightforward. He went for amatol, and to show how big a bang that produces, we've placed a pound of something similar between the front seats of this car.
3, 2, 1, fire in. Wait. Did he say the same amount? Because that doesn't look like it's big enough to explode.
For amatol, and to show how explosive to use, however, was fairly straightforward. He went for amatol, and to show how big a bang that produces, we've placed a pound of something similar.
A pound.
Between the front seats of this car.
Okay, I don't know how much explosive. 2, 1, fire in. Okay.
That was a pound. Tibbets was going to use 4 1/4 tons. Still.
Okay, then. Never mind.
Even if the explosives and the fuses could be trusted to work properly, and even if they could get across to France without being detected and up the estuary without being blown to smithereens, and even if the Campbelltown could hit the lock gates exactly right and the commandos could get off and
the timing
do
of
whatever
the
it is they
explosion.
had to do, they still had a problem. How do they get home again? Because the Navy wouldn't provide a second destroyer, they were instead given 16 of these. Today, this Fairmile ML is a tourist boat taking trippers around Torbay, and certainly it's better suited to this than it ever was for Operation Chariot.
They're made of Bakelite bonded plywood.
It was a cheap, mass production boat designed primarily to make the Navy look bigger than it really was.
Interesting.
May God speed all who sail in her.
It certainly wasn't particularly good in the open sea. It tended to roll badly in a swell, which made everyone on board queasy. It's not so bad if it was only used to bring the soldiers home, but this little fleet would also be used to get half the commandos out to Saint-Nazaire as well. So there'd be 15 commandos wedged down here with all their kit. And when they got to the other end, they'd be expected to get out and start fighting immediately.
It's a jerry.
There wasn't only seasickness to worry about, because while each ship had small guns fore and aft, it didn't have any armor. No, really. All that stood between the German guns and the men down here
That's
were
it.
a few planks of wood. And to make matters worse, each boat was fitted with 2 500-gallon long-range fuel tanks, which were completely exposed on the deck. Campbelltown was a bomb on purpose. These things, they were bombs by accident. Honestly, it's hard to think of any vessel less well-suited to the job in hand.
Mm-hmm.
The commandos were hard men, good fighters. But they'd been picked for their intelligence as well, so they must have known that the chances of getting to Saint-Nazaire were small. The chances of doing the job were microscopic, and the chances of them getting home again on a wooden boat, groaning under the weight of exposed fuel tanks past an alerted enemy, were virtually non-existent. They must have known that Operation Chariot, for the vast
Suicide.
majority, was going to be a one-way ticket.
We were all of us told if we wanted to leave a letter for our next of kin, our loved ones, you could do so. And you wrote on the envelope to be posted in the event of my failing to return.
And there was one, Sergeant Bill Gibson, who I knew them all very well indeed. And I remember seeing his face, and I knew he was going to be killed.
My dearest Dad, by the time you get this, I shall be one of the many who have sacrificed their unimportant lives for what little ideals we may have. I can only hope that by laying down my life, the generations to come might in some way remember us and benefit by what we've done. At a time like this, I turn to you, Dad, and God. I hope there will be peace for everyone soon. My love to everyone. I'll remember you. Your loving...
I'd like to think we haven't lost these kind of people. It's just amazing. I wonder if, you know, all these jokes of like, imagine our generation storming the beaches of Normandy and stuff. And I think that's, you know, it's haha, it's funny. They'd be like taking selfies and whatnot, jokes. I like to think that we would come to meet our situation bravely, but just seeing how these guys handle themselves is inspiring.
Son, Bill.
Somehow I thought it's unlucky to write your last letter to your parents. No, my attitude was I'm coming back.
Two of men came to me and said, would you take these letters home to our wives if we're killed? And I said, but wait a minute, I'm going with you. Oh, you won't be killed, I said. They were both killed.
Huh?
The Saint-Nazaire raiders weren't allowed to reveal details of the operation to their loved ones. But for the bomb
Wait, what?
I'm going with you. Oh, you won't be killed, I said. They were both killed.
So they just like knew?
The Saint-Nazaire raiders weren't allowed to reveal details of the operation to their loved ones. But for the bomb designer Nigel Tibbett, recently married and the father of a young son, the thought of keeping his wife in the dark was too much. So he told her. And she said afterwards they both sort of knew he wouldn't be coming back. So as the commandos gathered here in Falmouth in Cornwall, ready to join the Campbelltown and the little boats that were anchored out there in the bay, Lord Mountbatten gathered them all together and very unusually, he said to them that any man who wanted to step down could walk away without a stain on his character. Not one of them did.
Man, A+ to Jeremy Clarkson. He's such a good narrator and host to this whole thing. He was great in Victoria's Cross, and he does it beautifully. I normally see him as sort of a funny guy and everything, but he's so serious and respectful and just great. Let's do it, boys.
At 2 p.m. on the 26th of March, 1942, the Armada set sail with 264 commandos and 357 Navy personnel on board. That's a total of 621 men. Only 227 would come back.
I had just enough light to read a book that I was reading, and I just concentrated on reading this book. The thought of
That's like a 38% chance to live, something like that.
Was reading, and I just concentrated on reading this book. The thought that crosses your mind is, I hope I'm going to be able to do my part, without being overcome by fear.
That's so great. He's not worried about if he's going to die so much. He's worried about if he can do his part without being too afraid. I love
to
that.
each other about what we're going to do, and we all went through it with our blokes. You know, I and my 4 guys just went through what we were going to do. I certainly thought to myself, my God, I hope I'm not going to show fear in front of my men if I'm frightened.
Tense, I suppose, would be the thing. Anticipation.
Such great men.
Yes. Fortunately, I think we were more worried about it being rough, because it's very, as you can imagine, physically exhausting to be seasick all the time.
That's true.
But we were lucky. It was calm.
33 hours later, they arrived at the mouth of the estuary, and the captain of the Campbelltown, Lieutenant Commander Sam Beatty, instructed Tibbets to set the fuses on his bomb. He then began to creep up the estuary. Ideally, he'd have stuck to the deep water channel, the channel the Tirpitz would have used.
Oh, don't tell me he hits ground.
This would have meant hugging the northern shore right under the noses of the German sentries. So he had to go right down the middle, despite the fact that the water, even at high tide, was just 10 feet deep.
Jeez. Don't run aground.
To reduce the ship's draft, much of the heavy armor and the big guns had been removed. So if she did become grounded, she'd be a sitting duck.
We did go across sandbanks a couple of times and dragged a bit going over. But it was so quick that you hadn't got time to think, good God, if I'm marooned here, I'd be shot to pieces.
It's hard to know, really, what the German gunners in this pillbox were doing when the Campbelltown chugged by. I mean, yes, she'd been hurriedly converted to look a bit like a German ship, but she was trundling right down the shallows. You'd have thought that would have alerted them to the fact something was up, but...
That's why I was wondering, with all their ideas that, you know, it's so impossible that it might be impossible because they won't expect it, I almost thought they would hug the channel despite being run right under the noses of the guns and the German sentries, just to be that much more inconspicuous.
Obviously it didn't, because they didn't open fire.
And nor did the guns at the next pillbox, or the one after that. But then...
I mean, once the first set of guns don't fire, I feel like you must feel much more safe, because then the next set of guns is probably like, well, they didn't fire, and so they aren't really up to anything.
Things started to go wrong.
You know.
The RAF had finally agreed to stage a bombing raid, but the pilots had been told not to bomb if there was cloud cover in case they hit French civilians. Unfortunately, it was cloudy, and they hadn't been told what to do instead. So they just flew around, alerting the Germans to the fact that something was up.
Their flak guns turned very easily down onto the surface of the river.
I missed something, guys.
Or the one after that. But then, things started to go wrong. The RAF had finally agreed to stage a bombing raid, but the pilots had been told not to bomb if there was cloud cover in case they hit French civilians. Unfortunately, it was cloudy, and they hadn't been told what to do instead. So they just flew around, alerting the Germans to the fact that something was up.
Their flak guns turned very easily down onto the surface of the river, plus their searchlights.
With the Germans now suspicious, the Campbelltown's Heath Robinson modifications and fake German flag wouldn't fool them.
I'm sorry, but what was the point, even if there wasn't cloud cover? Why jeopardize the secrecy, the stealth? What were they going to do? I'm not going to go back again, but what were the planes going to do if there wasn't clouds?
Long. And sure enough, they were soon challenged by a signal from the shore. But the British had a trick up their sleeves.
We found the German code books, naval code books, and the Germans didn't know we had them. And so we had the up-to-date passwords and countersigns, and we were using them.
This feels just like A New Hope, Star Wars, where they're like trying to go under, you know, like Han Solo, like they're trying to go into the Death Star, and they're like out of date codes or whatever, but they're pulling it off.
Consternation of the German signalman who was flashing signals asking who we were, and we were flashing back the right answers. We're a friendly force coming in for the night. We've got a damaged ship or something like this, you see, and putting them off.
Twice, the Germans opened fire, but each time they were silenced by reassuring signals coming from the Campbelltown. This meant the ships could get nearer and nearer to the target. Eventually, though, the Germans realised that, yes, unbelievably, it really was a British raiding party sailing right through their front door.
How did they figure it out?
To get to this point here, just 2,000 yards from the dock gates, which are kind of just round the headland. Maybe you can see it just over there. And all hell broke loose.
There was an awful lot of stuff hitting Campbelltown. I mean, it was absolutely hitting our poor little MLs, but Campbelltown being the big target, you know, and there was a sort of glare of searchlights.
I just was excited when the English flag went up. Sorry.
A sort of glare of searchlights.
The air was filled with things that whistled, hummed and shrieked, and every one of them lethal.
The main focus for the German gunners was the bridge of the Campbelltown, where the captain, Beatty, was trying to keep a steady course by calling out steering directions.
The chap at the wheel was killed. His place was taken by another raider who was killed almost immediately. So then a chap called Montgomery, who was a Royal Engineer, took over, and he was standing there thinking, what do I do with this? When suddenly there was a tap on his shoulder, and a voice said, I'll take it, old man. And it was Tibbets, the egghead, the brilliant scientist from Dartmouth, the man who designed the bomb in the bow, found himself at the wheel as the destroyer was on its final charge.
I remember a red-hot shell passing through the wardroom just over our heads and going on out and didn't explode.
If just one shell hit the rudder or the engine, or worse, the bomb in the bow, the mission would be over. But at this point, it wouldn't have mattered because Beatty was lined up on the wrong lighthouse, so he was heading for the wrong target.
At the last minute, a searchlight picked out the lighthouse over there, the green one, and Beatty realised his mistake. He barked out an order. So Tibbets swung the wheel hard to the right to try and miss the jetty here, and then hard to the left again. And you've got to remember, he's in a ship that doesn't handle, doing 22 knots at night under a hail of enemy fire, and yet he managed to just graze the jetty there.
Is it still there? Is there a mark?
It's just an extraordinarily brilliant piece of seamanship. They came round the old mole. They're really shifting at this point. And pretty soon you can pick out the dock gates. There they are, look. There they are. Maybe, I don't know, 500 metres to go. Really cranking it up now, the old girl. Imagine what it would have been like to have been doing this on that night in March 1942. Dark, searchlights, cannon, machine gun, massive fire coming from that bank. Aiming straight for that. What's the impact going to be like?
Are you going to hit it?
It's going to be huge.
Ship reared up, putting Tibbets's 4-ton bomb right over the gate. And despite the firestorm, Beatty turned to his men and said, well, there we are. 4 minutes late.
Oh, God, classic. Well, there we are. 4 minutes late. guns just blazing over your head. Oh, there we are.
Firestorm
Tally-ho.
Beatty turned to his men and said, well, there we are. 4 minutes late. The Navy had done its part of the job brilliantly. And now in the 2.5 hours before Campbelltown blew, the army had to get ashore and create havoc. Yes, the Germans had fixed gun emplacements, and yes, they outnumbered the British by 20 to 1. But that was no problem, because the raiding party, remember, were commandos.
Damn right.
They may have been picked for their intelligence and free
Salutes.
thinking, but my God, they were tough. The backbone of their training was speed marching, and each commando unit would compete to see who could